Welcome to another exciting episode of Things I Didn't Learn at Harvard. Today, we are joined by a very, very special guest. We are joined by the world renowned Michael Deem. So, here's a small introduction on Michael Deem as I'm reading off his LinkedIn profile. This is what Michael says about himself. Michael Deem is an experienced senior professional who has operated in senior management, board, and advisor capacities with companies ranging from startup to rapid growth to large multinational companies. Currently, general partner at Smart Health Catalyzer and CEO of a startup, formerly entrepreneur in residence at Khosla Ventures. His intellectual bandwidth has benefited companies from a wide cross section of industries that include life sciences, artificial intelligence, AI, genomics, data science, biotechnology, energy, and cancer research. Uh, as far as Michael's LinkedIn profile, there are a bunch of alphabets connected to him, as well as his name, but this is an abbreviated version. Founder at Certus LLC, CEO, CTO, independent director, operating partner, private equity, venture capital, audit, life science, AI, biotechnology, NACD, and SAFE. And Michael is one of our few guests that actually did go to Harvard. So I think that would be a great conversation. So, well, Michael, first of all, welcome to the show.
Well, I've had a great life. I've had a number of amazing experiences. I grew up on the East Coast. I went to school on the West Coast. I went back to the East Coast to go to Harvard for a little bit. I worked with a small company there called Curigen. I was a professor at UCLA for a while. I was a professor at Rice University for about 25 years. I was chair of the bioengineering department there. I started the graduate program in systems synthetic and physical biology. And then maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I decided I want to go back to the private world. So I started as a venture capitalist. I was an entrepreneur in residence with Khosla Ventures. And there I really learned how venture capital worked. I learned how to identify portfolio companies, how to mentor companies, how to fund companies. And that's something now I do as a general partner with Smart Health Catalyzer. Smart Health Catalyzer, our mission there is to bring the untapped potential of the Midwest to the rest of the world. The Midwest receives about 25% of the NIH funding in the United States, but they only receive about 5% of the venture capital investments. So a lot of really great ideas, a lot of really great professors and students there in the Midwest, and it's untapped. So there's a good investment potential there, many new ideas, many things that will change the world. And our goal is to identify some of those and help support them and help them invent the future and get their technology to the public. We're based in Chicago and we're focused on therapeutics and also on devices. So we just ran a best of Midwest competition. We reviewed about 53 companies, and from those we got it down to the top 10, and we had those professors present to 10 venture capitalists. So we started this networking process between the professors and the companies and the investors just a couple months ago. It was really very exciting to see everybody's enthusiasm about some of the potential from the Midwest. A really great school for bioengineering. I think it's definitely in the top 20, maybe the top 10. Traditionally been very strong. Indianapolis is quite strong. Chicago is quite strong. Cleveland's quite strong. There's really a lot of potential. There's a lot of great research that's going on in the Midwest. It's interesting because I was a professor for 25 years, so I understand how the principal investigators are thinking. I'm now an investor, so I'm on the other side looking at investable ideas. And what we're really trying to help the faculty, what we're really trying to help the professors do is distill down maybe 25 years worth of research into a 4-minute or a 10-minute or 20-minute presentation. And a lot of times it's very difficult for them to do that because they have so many things that they've discovered over their career. And we want them to focus on the current idea that they're excited about, that we think will change the world, And we want them to describe that in a way that the investors will appreciate the potential. So we're looking for billion-dollar ideas. We're looking for ideas that will really change the world for the better. And we want them to distill that down into a slide deck with maybe 10 slides. It's a different perspective for professors, because professors like to talk for 60 minutes about all of the details in which they're an expert. And we really want to get them down to something very efficient, talking about the market, talking about the team, talking about the technology, talking about the protection that they might have, for example, from patents for their technology, and then really talking about the potential for how their technology is inventing the future, how it's helping people, and how it's going to make the world a better place on a very big scale. All of those are great topics. So longevity is quite popular right now. Cancer is a big problem. Cancer has been really difficult to treat in the US. We can treat childhood cancers, but adult cancers are pretty difficult. I would say diseases of the old age are something that are quite interesting. Neurological diseases are quite interesting, and could be a combination of three of those four ideas, right? It could be something like Alzheimer's disease. So we're looking at diseases that affect a large number of Americans, millions of Americans, and we're looking at how we can provide some help for treatment of these diseases. And then at the same time, in a parallel activity, we're also interested in devices. So how a mechanical engineer has been really clever and come up with new devices for treating different ailments of Americans.
Sure. No, I think that's great. So, I mean, you're talking to a guy here. I'm standing here while we're recording this episode. I have two artificial hips. I had them both replaced about 4 or 5 years ago. And the thought was, I don't know how recently they were invented, Michael, but I don't know what people did before that, right? I guess I would just be on crutches, in pain, hobbling for the rest of my life.
Right. So that's a pretty good example, because there's so many things that goes into the design of that artificial hip. You want the replacement hip to be strong, right? But it can't be too strong. If it's too strong, then it'll degrade the bone around it. So it has to have a similar sort of strength to the bone. You want your immune system to not really recognize it too much, because you don't want your immune system to start attacking that artificial hip. So, but you also want it to be accepted and integrated into the rest of the tissue in your body. So there's a lot of bioengineering that goes on at the mechanical level, at the chemical level, at the biological signaling level, to make that happen. And then just the surgery itself, right? So how do you train the orthopedic surgeons to extract the old, the ball in the joint and then put in this new one? And then also the physical therapy. How do you train, your muscles to adapt and to help your body accept this new replacement?
Oh yeah, and maybe I shouldn't admit this. I haven't seen my ortho in like 3 years because I have nothing to say. He'd say, "How you doing?" I would say, "I'm great," and that would be the end. I am in the best shape I've been in my entire life.
That's really what we want to do in bioengineering. We want to alleviate suffering from disease and ailment, and as we all survive longer and we all get older, there are several diseases and several ailments that are going to pop up, and we sort of like to help treat those. I think diseases of the old age. So, can we have vaccines for things like Alzheimer's, or can we have vaccines for things like dementia? Or, maybe can we have computer games for kids who have ADHD? Can we have games that will then sort of maybe occupy some of their attention and retrain their mind so that they don't have so much difficulty learning in school? So I've been working in vaccines for probably 20, 25 years now. I first started with the influenza vaccine. One issue with influenza is we get the vaccine in the Northern Hemisphere in around October, and that vaccine is designed in January, February. So there's, 6 to 8 months between when the vaccine's designed and when we get it. So there can be a difference between the vaccine and the virus that we actually see. And the more the virus is different from the vaccine, the less effective the vaccine. So one thing we've worked on is predicting how the effectiveness of the vaccine decreases as the virus evolves away from the vaccine. And this approach now is used on all six of the inhabited continents of the world. It's not used in Antarctica, but it's used everywhere else. This is relevant for COVID. We've heard about the new vaccines. We need to redesign the COVID vaccines. I think eventually it'll be just like influenza, where we have an annual COVID vaccine. Another disease we've worked on for a while is dengue fever. So there are 4 serotypes of dengue fever. Sometimes we say there are 4 dengue viruses. And if you're vaccinated against one, you're actually more susceptible to severe dengue from the other 3. We want to vaccinate people against all 4 dengue viruses because, in many places of the world, all 4 dengue viruses are present. There are about 120 countries in which dengue virus is endemic. Also, people travel between different regions, so people are likely to see more than one dengue virus. So if you can't, vaccinate just against one virus, then we want to vaccinate against all 4. But something else happens. So the immune system tends to recognize some of the viruses more than others. So you might have good protection against 2 of the viruses, but not so good protection against the other 2 dengue viruses. This is not just an academic question. There are only a couple licensed dengue vaccines right now, and they're not effective against all 4 serotypes. One of them's even been withdrawn because of this issue. So we thought about this and we realized that the immune system, it's creating T cells against the virus in the lymph nodes, and humans have hundreds of lymph nodes. So what if we vaccinated against the different serotypes in different places on the body? Maybe, dengue virus 1 in left arm, 2 in right arm, 3 in left leg, 4 in right leg. And then the body would in different lymph nodes create T cells against those different dengue viruses. And this seems to work pretty well. So we showed this was an effective strategy, and we have a patent on dengue vaccination by this multi-site approach. And then we have a more general patent on really all infectious disease vaccination by this multi-site approach. There's a concept called herd immunity, and the idea is once enough people get vaccinated against, let's say, COVID, then the transmission of COVID in the whole population will be reduced a lot.
Right.
So not everybody has to be vaccinated. Maybe 70% of the people have to be vaccinated, and then that will sort of lead to the die out of COVID. Now, COVID's interesting because it travels between different countries, right? People get on planes and on boats and they travel between countries. So it's not just in the US that we need 70% of the people to be vaccinated, but sort of in the whole world. Influenza is similar, and influenza is also interesting because it really comes from birds. So we tend to get influenza from pigs, and pigs tend to get it from birds. So to eradicate influenza, we'd have to vaccinate all the pigs and maybe all the birds as well. So it's kind of difficult to achieve herd immunity for some of these diseases. I tend to work more on the science and the engineering side. So, I want to be honest about the vaccine is not always a perfect match, and the vaccine rarely has 100% effectiveness. For COVID, the vaccine is actually really effective. For influenza, much less so. But we should just accept that, and we should admit that, and then work on methods to improve the effectiveness of the vaccine, or at least to estimate the effectiveness. So as the virus changes, when do we need to redesign the vaccine, for example? For influenza, it's because the virus mutates. So
Right.
we retain protection, the antibody type of protection that is relevant for influenza. We retain that for 25 or 30 years. And the vaccine, it contains 2 strains against influenza. Let's see, it contains an influenza H1 strain, it contains an H3 strain, it contains 2 strains against influenza B. And usually at least one of those strains evolves enough that we need to redesign the influenza vaccine. So typically the influenza vaccine is changing on a yearly basis. And it's also, we tend to get it in the winter. So we're 6 months out of phase with the winter in the Southern Hemisphere. So the influenza vaccine is redesigned for the Northern Hemisphere and for the Southern Hemisphere. So there's a lot of work that goes on at the international level to choose what the vaccine will be for the next year. So the COVID vaccine was pretty interesting. With one vaccine, the Moderna or the Pfizer vaccine is about, I think, around 85% effective. And with 2 vaccines, it's around 95% effective. So it's actually a really effective vaccine. It's there are also different approaches for the vaccine itself. So the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine, those are mRNA vaccines. So those vaccines are introducing genetic material into the cells, and then the cells are making the proteins, and the proteins are stimulating the immune system. There were some other approaches to introduce the genetic material. using what's called AAV. That was more like the vaccine that was used in Russia and in China. And then there were some vaccines directly introducing the protein material. Most vaccines do that, but for COVID, this new approach of the mRNA vaccine, that seemed to be most effective. And people have been working on that for 15 or so years for cancer vaccines, and they weren't sure it would work. And COVID was really the first demonstration that mRNA vaccines can be so effective.
Interesting. Interesting. Wow. Who would know this? And of course, we're hearing from an expert, so you can definitely take his word, because this is what a large part of what you've done has been focused on this, right? Since you said you've been doing this for 20 plus years.
Been working on vaccines for a long time, and it was really satisfying to see how quickly the scientific and then the manufacturing and pharmaceutical industries responded to the COVID outbreak. We had a vaccine very quickly, probably 6 months or 8 months after COVID was first discovered. We have sort of first steps at the vaccine. That's a pretty amazing response. So I've been working on zeolites, which are crystals used in the energy industry for now about 35 years, even longer than the vaccines. Zeolites are really beautiful crystals. They have large pores and channels. They're used in catalysis, so they're used in industries like oil refining that are $1 trillion a year industries. They power a lot of the energy materials that lead to our quality of life. And one of the issues with zeolites is they can be difficult to make. So we might want to make a new zeolite, or we might have a zeolite that we just can't make it perfectly enough. It has defects or faults. And I work on designing molecules that fill the holes and the channels of the zeolites so that we can then synthesize the zeolites. And we just published a chapter in a book about design of these structure directing agents. The whole book was about artificial intelligence methods for understanding and synthesizing zeolites. We also published the concluding chapter in that book. So it's a really interesting area of materials that power a lot of our society's goals.
Wait,
it's like a field that nobody, I have to confess, I don't think people are very familiar with, but it's obviously critical to the functioning of the economy, and then interesting application of AI, again, in a way that's kind of hidden from public view, but hopefully we'll all see the results.
I live in Houston, so when I look out my window, I can see 2 of the largest refineries in the United States. And when I go down to Galveston, I see another 2. I think we have 3 or 4 of these 600,000 barrel a day refineries. And zeolites are one of the most important catalysts that allow those refineries to do that refining of the oil into gasoline.
Wow, that's amazing.
So these, again, Michael, so you're saying zeolites are crystals, so they're like crystalline elements that.
Zeolites are crystals with these holes in them, and the way to sort of think about it is you pour the oil onto the zeolite and out comes the gasoline. It's more complicated than that. There's this big refinery that gives all the technology to make that happen, but essentially a zeolite allows you to convert the oil into gasoline. Yeah, so different zeolites produce different products. So if the refinery wants to make more gasoline or more jet fuel or more diesel fuel, they can adjust many of the conditions of the refinery. They can also adjust the zeolites that are used. And then also as the crude oil itself becomes different. So the crude oil from different countries can be more or less thick or more or less sour. And that also affects the refining process. So the zeolites are one of the materials that helps convert this wide, diverse range of crude oil coming in into the products that are most valuable to the market and to the society at that time.
And I assume these are used worldwide, right?
These are used worldwide, and actually the largest use, I think, is in powdered laundry detergent. So about 25% of your powdered laundry detergent is zeolite A. It softens the water so that the rest of the detergent works better.
Huh. Wow.
Wow. Victor, we're getting schooled in this conversation.
We've come a long way since my high school chemistry class.
Seems that way.
Science and engineering are important for society.
I know.
Sure. So one of the areas I was responsible for at Coastal Ventures was sustainability. And, as we transition to sort of the new economy and new ways of living, we're slowly getting away from the older types of energy production. We're getting away from the fossil fuels. We're moving more towards a sustainable future. We're still going to need energy as a society. How can we structure our economy so that we're a little bit more sustainable in our production and use of energy? And there are a lot of really clever ideas out there in sustainability, and we see pretty much all of them at COSO. So that's something that I continue to work on in my consulting as well. One thing people are thinking about now is all of the energy that's used in shipping. Goods are manufactured in one part of the world and then shipped to another part of the world. Shipping is very efficient. It also uses a lot of energy. Right now, most shipping uses diesel fuel. That probably will be phased out in the next 10 years or so, and we'll move to a new fuel. So there's a discussion going on right now. Will that new fuel be something like ammonia, or will the new fuel be something like hydrogen? And that's, people are not sure yet. That's an interesting area for investment.
So, Michael, it sounds like, to sort of sum up, your two areas of focus are, number one, on the healthcare side, making sure we live longer and in a more healthy way, which is always good. And the second is that as we live longer, we have a better lifestyle, quality of life, in terms of sustainability. Yep. And all the things that we've kind of gotten accustomed to. So that's great. So I'm a big fan of both of those.
Within healthcare, we want to cure disease. We want to ameliorate suffering. We also want to make our quality of life better as we age. We want to help with some of what we call diseases of old age. And really, our society is powered by energy. So, we need to find more sustainable ways of achieving that power for our society, and we will.
Okay. Well, good luck. Well, Michael, we're counting on you. Rajiv and I are not old, but before we get there, we're counting on you to figure it out for us. So that would be great.
Yeah, Michael, I got to say, this has been a terrific conversation. Time just flew by and we didn't even realize it. And I think there's a lot to unpack here. I think perhaps your calendar permitting, we would love to have a second conversation with you, maybe talk about the parts that we weren't able to cover in this conversation, like communication and relationships and communication vis-a-vis the startup world and founding and capital raising and things like that. And maybe that's something that we can have in another conversation, obviously, if you'd be amenable to it.
It's been a pleasure to speak with you, Rajiv and Victor, and I'd love to be back on your podcast.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks, Michael. Great meeting you.
Nice to meet you and your listeners.